Hello, listeners. Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Nighttime. In tonight's episode, we're going to be discussing one of Nova Scotia's most often discussed cold cases. Lyndon Fuller was a young man who appeared to have everything going for him. He had a loving family, employment, he was active in his community, and by all accounts, a salt-of-the-earth type guy. But as the year 1988 progressed, it became clear that the 22-year-old Lyndon was struggling with something beneath the surface. His family began to notice signs of increasing depression, and their encouragement for him to seek help led to a short hospital stay. But things were going to get worse, and fast. On a cold November evening in 1988, Lyndon Fuller was last seen barefoot and dressed only in hospital pajamas, jumping from the third-story window of the Western Kings Memorial Hospital in Berwick, Nova Scotia. That's where we'll start tonight. In this episode of Nighttime, Madeleine Klein and I will explore one of Nova Scotia's most enduring mysteries, the disappearance of Lyndon Fuller. Ms. Madeleine Klein, it's wonderful to see you tonight. How are you doing over there?
I'm well. I was thinking about what I want to say to you, and I didn't really come up with anything.
I like to make it easy on you. Are you watching any cool shows or documentaries, anything like that going on?
I know I'm like 3 years late, but I just finished Squid Game for the first time ever. I'm a little tardy to the party, but I did it, and it was amazing.
Okay.
I loved it.
I love Squid Games. I'm watching the second season right now. You're ahead of me because when you say you're watching it, you just like blew through it. I don't know how you did that. You watched it in like 25 minutes.
There's no other way to watch a show. Yeah. Like you sit down and you power through it.
Okay. It's like work for you. I'm in the second season now. Second season didn't do it for me quite like the first season, but overall, I love Squid Games. I'm glad you caught
Totally.
up. That's one good thing about like especially now there are so many different shows and movies and all this stuff. You could never keep up. So it's cool to be able to kind of wait it out and find what's the cream of the crop that rises to the top and watch that. That's kind of what you did with Squid Games.
And yeah, like the first season, I was like, this is so good. Like I've never really seen anything like this before. And then the second season was, to me, a little underwhelming. Like it was fine, but not as good as the first, in my opinion.
But regardless, for the listeners out there, do you suggest they catch up and watch Squid Games if they haven't yet?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's one of the ones you have to watch.
I second that. Let's get into it here, though. We got an interesting story to discuss, certainly a mystery and one with a lot of troubling details. But this is a story that came from a listener request to me. Actually, I think I had 3 different listener requests for this specific story, all within the same week. I put out a post online saying, if there are any crime, mystery, missing person type stories you'd like to hear discussed on Nighttime, let me know. I had 3 separate people write to me and recommend the story of Lyndon Fuller, a then 22-year-old man who went missing in the Berwick area of Nova Scotia, which for some people would be considered rural Nova Scotia, but that's just because it's not in the big city of Halifax. But this story, it's a fascinating one. I've recognized the name and I recognize his photo, but I had never dug into it until the preparation for this episode. And I see why this is a story that has captivated so many people for so many years. It's fascinating. I'm sure it was new to you, right? When I pitched this to you?
Totally new. I'd never heard of it before, but after reading about it and we'll get into it, but like there's not a lot of information, but it's so fascinating. I've been looking so forward to talking about it because it's truly just it's not an unsolved mystery, it's an unexplained mystery. Like it's just very odd.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I know what you mean when you say that. And I think listeners will as well when we get into it. And you also mentioned that there's not a lot about this case out there. It's true, there isn't. There was just a couple articles, and each one was kind of those, 15-year anniversary, the 20-year anniversary with a brief recap of the case and an interview with his family who has never given up searching for him after all these years. So we were able to kind of pick out the majority of the story through these articles. But one thing that I found really interesting is uh, eventually the family hires a private detective to assist in the search for Lyndon Fuller. And I think a lot of the things the private detective had to say really changes my thoughts about the whole story. But we'll come back to him and some of the things he said. Let's tell the story first. Why don't we start at the beginning with a little bit about then 22-year-old Lyndon Fuller. And for the listeners, again, keep in mind, we're traveling back to a different era. We're going back to the 80s, 1988, which is a lot more simple time.
What a year. I'm just kidding. I wasn't alive.
You weren't? I'm a 81 baby.
93.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, my husband was born in 88.
Okay. Well, he probably also doesn't know this story or remember the 80s, but I remember
Well,
88.
I was going to ask if you remember this story. Where is Berwick? Like, is it closer to Halifax or
Yeah,
Cape
no,
Breton?
closer to Halifax. It's about an hour outside of Halifax driving, and it's a smaller kind of community. Like everyone would know each other in Berwick, and it would be seen as like a safe, peaceful spot.
Have you been there?
Oh yeah, agriculture would be a big employer in Berwick. There'd be a lot of farms. There'd be like a little tiny downtown. But I imagine like kind of the setting of a Stephen King novel is like a
Okay.
town like Berwick. You know what I mean? Like the downtown would be just like one street, a coffee shop, a bank, a post office, an office building, and that's probably it.
It sounds positively lovely, but I think everywhere in Nova Scotia is lovely. So,
Okay, well,
like, I think Shelburne's lovely.
keep thinking that and don't come down here because it will break the vision, I promise you. Let's learn a little bit about Lyndon. He's, by all accounts, was a great salt of the earth style guy. He was seen as kind, hardworking, well accomplished. He had recently graduated from King's Tech Community College, which a community college that would, if you wanted to get into a lot of different kind of farming or heavy equipment operating, these kinds of things, you could go to King's Tech Community College. That would be a good jump off point for that kind of career. So at 22, he had his ducks in a row. He was also a member of something called a 4-H club, which is a kind of community leadership group that is big in the agricultural communities of Nova Scotia. And this is something that would kind of be like, imagine like a bunch of kids taking like leadership courses, public speaking courses. And Lyndon was seen as like kind of like a leader or a mentor towards the younger kids because he did such a great job in this. So he was someone that was like his parents would be proud to have Lyndon out there representing his family. Just a regular great guy from Berwick. By all accounts, also a talented hockey player. He was a goalie. One of the main photos going around of him, if people search his name, is him after a game with his helmet off, but you can see that he's dressed in his hockey gear, all covered in sweat and all that stuff.
I am constantly surprised at how many hockey players come out of Nova Scotia.
Really?
I always thought that was a Western
Well,
sport.
we do have Sidney Crosby. He
I
lives not too
know.
far
I
from
had
here.
no
Yeah,
idea.
it's I've seen his parents' car. This was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I was like coming out of the bank and there was this kind of nice car parked outside. I believe it was a BMW, but the BMW logo on like the front and the back of the car were like replaced with like kind of custom ones. So it was like a BMW logo and a Boston Bruins logo kind of like mixed together.
Okay.
So he must have, I'm guessing Sydney had like custom ordered it or something for his parents. I commented on it
Mhm.
to someone and they're like, yeah, that's Sidney Crosby's parents' car. That's always around here.
See, the only reason I know he's from Dartmouth, right?
Yeah.
The only reason I know that is because when I was in Dartmouth, like almost 8 years ago, it was like home of Sidney Crosby. And I was like, I thought he was from Saskatchewan. So that's the only reason I know that.
No, he's a dark side. We call it the dark side. Dartmouth and Halifax are separated by a harbor. Everyone on Halifax, people from Halifax say the best thing about Dartmouth is the view of Halifax.
I like that.
Yeah. Let's get back to Lyndon. He worked again, 22, had all this stuff going on, but he worked on his family's farm, which is just outside of Berwick, an area called Wellsford, which is I don't know if you'd say a suburb of Berwick, but just
A hamlet.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. And to put into context the difference from today, 2025, to 1988, one thing about Lyndon, that was interesting in the lead up to his disappearance, he had just bought a new vehicle, a 1988 Chev Silverado at 22 years old. What do you like at 22 nowadays? I don't believe you could buy a brand new truck.
No, it was probably like 5 grand back then.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, now like trucks are so expensive. I bring it up because I'm shopping for a new vehicle, and
Not
it's
a
like cars are
truck.
definitely not a truck. Cars are
Okay.
so expensive right now.
They're like even used cars. It's insane.
Mhm. I'm leaning towards a Bronco. I love Ford Broncos, and not because of OJ. They just look kind of bad.
I don't like the way the new Broncos look. Get an old one and really channel your inner OJ.
I should. A white Bronco. Well, Lyndon had a lot of good going on for him. At 22, getting a new truck, recently graduating college. The future is at his fingertips. And that's when things seem to begin to go wrong. Tell us a little bit about what starts to change with Lyndon.
Um, in the weeks leading up to all of this happening, he started experiencing mild depression. And it could have been because he broke up with his longtime girlfriend.
Yeah, he initiated the breakup though, which I think is
Yeah.
strange. But whatever it was, like it's just been described as mild depression, but it was enough that it made his family concerned. And in the middle of this bout of mild depression, he initiated the breakup with his girlfriend. But it didn't seem to be a nasty breakup because she will stick with him as a friend at least or support right up until the moment of his disappearance. And like I'm not an expert on kind of the mental health stuff, but this mild depression must be what I consider severe depression because his parents are so concerned that they begin to seek help and treatment for him, and it goes as far as to lead to a hospital stay.
Well, see, this is like my confusion starts early in this story
Mhm.
because I was the same, I thought the same, like mild depression, and he was hospitalized for it, which like great on his parents for taking those steps
Mhm.
and not just kind of like brushing it under the rug.
And in
But I think
1980, sorry to interrupt you, but in
that's okay.
1988, you'd think it would be even more unusual to recognize the signs
Yes.
of mild depression and seek help for your kid. Now, nowadays, people are so tuned into that. But in
Hmm.
88, in a farming community, I'm surprised you didn't get a toughen up, kid.
Right, exactly. But I think that goes to show just like it's the sign of the times too, because like he was admitted to a private room, no questions asked. Like now you need to be on the verge of self-harm
Mhm.
before you're allowed to stay in the
Yeah, that's when
ER. You're not getting a bed.
they put you on the waiting
Right.
list. They're like, show,
Yeah.
prove it. Yeah.
Like we had an incident a few years ago in Regina, and a young man went into the Regina General Emergency and was like, I am going to kill myself. And they turned him away and he did.
Wow.
And yeah, it was just like actually so terrible.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So I'm surprised yeah, for 1988 that he was admitted and it was like taken seriously.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, his parents seem to
yeah.
be doing everything correctly. They brought him to the hospital called the Western Kings Memorial Hospital, where he was admitted for treatment, but he doesn't spend a lot of time there. It was the 23rd of November, 1988, that he gets admitted, and things start to go wrong and get worse very quickly. Let's take a quick break, and then when we get back, we'll go through this because things are about to start happening fast. Again, it's the 23rd of November, 1988. 22-year-old Lyndon Fuller is just admitted to the hospital for treatment for his quote-unquote mild depression. As you already said, he has a private room. He's on the third floor of the building. You would think he's in safe hands and things are going to start getting better. Doesn't seem to be the case. And again, like we'll have to come back a few times to this idea of what mild depression is. And I lean on that term a lot because in every article I read, they make a point to say he was showing symptoms of mild depression. But in this case, his mild depression justified being medicated in an attempt to calm him. So it's mild depression to the point that he's being medicated. His ex-girlfriend is coming to visit regularly, and his parents are all but sitting bedside, almost taking shifts, staying in the hospital with Lyndon to make sure things are going well. But it isn't going too well. If anything, it seems to be getting worse while he's in there.
So, like, I have no credentials. I just want to
Okay.
make that clear right now. But there's something that's telling me that this mild depression, by today's standards, may have been like schizophrenic tendencies
Something.
or
It.
like bipolar,
Mhm.
like manic.
S-
This is not mild
No,
depression.
I know, and that term bothers me because it so clearly is like a mental health crisis that he's having, is what it seems like. Because
Yeah.
and that becomes even more clear as it goes. So he's being medicated. It doesn't seem to be helping. If anything, he seems to be getting more and more agitated. It's said that his ex-girlfriend who was visiting him also was getting increasingly concerned with him in the hospital. I haven't seen statements from her, but my impression is everybody around Lyndon was under the impression, was communicating with each other that things are going wrong and someone needs to intervene or something needs to happen. But again, you would think he's in the right place to get taken care of. Over his time in the hospital, again, he admitted on the 23rd of November. On the 25th of November, just 2 days later, is when everything that happens is about to happen. This day is a really bad day for Lyndon. It starts at 6:30 p.m. that evening on the 25th, 2 days after his admission to the hospital. He manages to get out of the hospital. He leaves, and we don't know what he does or where he goes, but he's only gone for 40 minutes. He leaves at 6:30, and then he's brought back at 10 after 7.
He was brought back by someone that was just described as a gentleman.
Yeah.
So, like,
Mhm.
did they talk? How did this guy realize that he was a patient and he should be in the hospital? There's lots of things missing here.
Oh, certainly. In this, the word gentleman, this comes from a statement that Lyndon's parents made to the media on, I think, on the 20th anniversary. They gave a pretty in-depth and thorough interview on the kind of the timeline of what happened, and they described it as, again, a gentleman brought him back to the hospital and he was readmitted. So who this gentleman is it someone that knew Lyndon? Did they see him on the street dressed in his kind of like hospital scrubs? Because he was in one of those like a
Right.
patient's outfit. And I can only imagine if you're someone who lives near a hospital and you see someone walking down the street dressed like a patient of a hospital, you're probably like, ooh, like this isn't good.
Yeah, it happens to like when I'm driving home from like because I work at a hospital, sometimes every now and then I'll be driving home and I'll see someone walking in a hospital gown. I'm like,
Hmm.
you left AMA,
Hmm. Spe-
which is against medical advice.
Okay, and especially in late November in Nova Scotia,
Yeah.
if you see
Ooh.
someone in a hospital gown without a winter jacket and stuff, that's pretty clearly something's up. So I can only imagine somebody, a good Samaritan, probably approached him and said, everything all right, buddy? Let's get you
Yeah.
back. Come on with me. Let's just get you back there. That's how I imagine this happening.
Yeah. Like I want to know what he was doing, where he was. Was he acting weird or just like obviously out of place because he was in hospital pajamas?
Based on what happens 35 minutes later, I'm going to guess he was acting weird. So he leaves the hospital at 6:30. A gentleman brings him back at 10 after 7. Lyndon is brought back up to his hospital room, which again was on the third floor, his private room. 35 minutes after he was brought back at 7:45, Lyndon was in the room, again on the third floor, with a nurse in the room with him who was treating him. His parents, both parents, were in the hospital, but they weren't in the room with him. I believe they were in a waiting area just outside of his hospital room. We don't know exactly what happened in Lyndon's private third floor room, but Lyndon, wearing just his white and blue pinstriped hospital pajamas, he's barefoot. He hops out of bed and makes a charge for the window and jumps out of the third floor window. He manages to open it and get out of it before the nurse is able to intervene. And it seems like he falls the full 3 stories down and fortunately lands on grass. Although when I looked at photos of the hospital, there where the window of the room he was staying in, there is kind of like like the front door is near there, the front door of the hospital. So there's this kind of overhang kind of thing. So when you pull up to the
An
door,
awning.
an awning or a carport sort of thing. So I don't know if he fell the
Okay.
full 3 floors down or if he managed to get on there and hop down. It would have been a 2 story drop onto the awning and then jumping down to the ground, which he may have done, or went the full 3 floors down. I'm leaning towards him going the full 3 floors down because right after he jumped out of the window, of course, the nurse is panicking. Lyndon's parents realize what happened, and immediately Lyndon's dad ran down 3 flights of stairs and got outside hoping to catch up to his son. He couldn't see his son, but he did see the patch, like a disturbed piece of grass where Lyndon would have landed. So I'm thinking if he landed the full 3 stories down, he would have left a pretty good mark in the ground. And it seems like that's what's happened. But from that moment, his dad gets outside only moments later, minutes later, if minutes, minute after he jumped out the window. From that point on, there is not a sight, there is not a sign or any drop of evidence of Lyndon Fuller's continued existence from that very moment, which is shocking to me.
It's like how?
Mhm.
And if he did drop that full 3 stories, how did he not break something
Yeah.
like his ankle or like anything in his one of his legs?
Mhm. He was
Yeah,
22 and in great shape. So unless he broke
true.
something, if he got banged up and he's in the middle of like a mental break, maybe he's able
Yeah.
to just, I can imagine that in this moment of him running and jumping out of the window, he was probably in the middle of a mental health crisis, which gives you quite a bit of energy, I can only assume.
Adrenaline took over.
That's what I'm thinking. And to make it even harder to trace his steps, it's the end of November. It was just below freezing this night. And there was no snow on the ground. So the ground would have been pretty much frozen. So it's not like he's going to leave footprints in the muddy ground. So the ground is frozen. So he's barefoot. So he's just running across it. And there's no snow. So there's no tracks. He just disappears.
Do you know, are you familiar like with this specific hospital
Yep.
and what it looks like around?
Yep.
What's around it? Is it just like bush, forest,
Well,
city? What's
I wouldn't say city. I would say town. There's several streets, which it's not like it's on the outskirts of Berwick, so it's not like in the town proper. There'd just be 2 or 3 streets, and then there'd be forest in both directions. So
okay.
you could, when I was looking at, like, even on the Google Maps, I was looking at the hospital, looking for, like, is there a river, lakes, like, what's around there? It's forest in both directions, with just a couple streets you'd have to get past if you wanted to, like,
Okay.
really get out of there. But you would still have probably, 5 minutes of running, 10 minutes of running before you'd be out of sight of cars and homes and such. Which again, I don't think would be impossible for him to do, but he's barefoot. He's not dressed for the weather. I think it was the night and the time that he went missing. It was about -3 degrees, which is damn
Okay.
cold when you're dressed in your hospital scrubs and barefoot.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's cold to me in my winter jacket, so
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And this isn't like so many other missing persons cases we talk about. There's, people are reported missing. The police don't take it seriously until days later. This was different. When someone runs from a hospital after jumping out of the window, immediately there is a ground search for Lyndon that includes RCMP, even police dogs. They find nothing. They have no idea of what direction he went. And again, it has remained that way. If you're looking for further evidence, there's nothing. No bank activity or phones or anything to give any indication of which direction Lyndon may have left and where he would have ended up, which again just seems impossible after all this time. And with this being such an isolated case, like Berwick isn't a city or a community that would have a lot of crime and missing persons cases. If a
right.
body is found in that area, it's probably Lyndon Fuller. And since 1988, that hasn't happened.
And it's just so mind-boggling because yeah, the search commenced like right away with dogs. And like if a dog can't,
And helicopters too.
how?
Mhm,
If a dog can't pick up a scent, he like literally just vanished.
mhm. Uh,
It's so it's just so bizarre.
Yeah.
And it like he couldn't have gotten far.
That's what you would think, but there are several kind of complicating factors in the search for Lyndon. One is the fact that there are train tracks not too far from where he went missing. It would have been in walking distance. I think when I mapped it, it was like a 20-minute walk from where he was. You could get to where a train track is, and a train would have passed at about 8 p.m. And he jumped out of the window at about 7:45. So that's always that the fact that a train went through there is enough to expand the search area, at least possibly. I don't know
It's
how.
super possible
Yeah.
he could have hopped on a train, but like he wasn't dressed for travel. Like he
Mhm.
wouldn't have done well on a train car. He would have damn near frozen to death, but you never know.
And I can't imagine jumping on a train is easy when you have running shoes on. When you're barefoot and flipping out and just jumped out of a third story window,
Right.
I imagine he was probably breathing pretty heavy within a couple minutes of getting out of there.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, like trains can go super slow sometimes. So he could have just hopped on.
Hmm.
But oh, that and like you never know. He could have ended up in New York and had no idea who he was and
Yeah.
just started a new life.
It's when there's a case that has so little to go on, that's always a possibility. He's in, the downtown Lower East Side of Vancouver, um, you know, just doing his thing. No one knows who he is, he's just some homeless guy or something. But the thing is this guy's mentally ill to the point that he's in like treatment for it. What are the chances that, 30 years have passed and he hasn't ended up in a hospital to the point that they had to ID him? Like I feel like it's so unlikely that he is out there somewhere.
Yeah, like and that's this case is just so I hate that we don't know.
Mhm. Well, we
And like I couldn't imagine how his family
Oh,
feels.
certainly. But we can read between the lines of a few things that will come up that we'll introduce now that I think may change it a bit. One thing, like everything we've talked about now, I think most people would think he probably ran into the woods and succumbed to the elements, and it just so happened that nobody has found him. If that was the case, and I think that would be the most likely thing based on everything we, the public, know about this story. But if that was the case, if you wanted to find him, you would be hiring, I don't know, search parties or cadaver dog experts to go look for Lyndon. The
Yes.
family didn't do that. What they did was they eventually hired a retired RCMP officer who is like a well-established private detective and a well-seasoned RCMP officer. He's an ex-RCMP officer who has a reputation for solving every case he's ever been on. The guy is kind of like a star investigator. His name is Craig McMullen, and the family hired him to serve as, again, their private investigator to track Lyndon. And that just like it. I just if everything we know about the case, it just seems like hiring a private investigator wouldn't be the right thing to do or the most logical thing to do, but they did.
Well, the private investigator will probably like cover all the bases, including like search and like you think.
You would think. I want to read you a statement by the private investigator, Craig McMullen. He spoke to a news outlet during, I think it was on the 20th anniversary, in one of the longer articles about Lyndon's disappearance. Some of the things he said just makes me think like there has to be more to this. Here's what he said. When you put a puzzle together, when you get down to the last two or three pieces, there's only so many shapes that fit, and this puzzle has pretty well been put together completely. So there's only a couple of pieces left, and I don't know where those pieces are because they're not in the puzzle box, but they're out there somewhere. I believe this case starts off with a bizarre beginning, and I think it's also going to have a bizarre end. So that's a statement he gave the press. That
Very
doesn't, well,
ominous.
it just doesn't sound like you're talking about someone who succumbed to the elements or
Yeah.
met an end on their own in the midst of a mental break.
And like, so going back to this succumbing to the elements, am I underestimating how vast the Nova Scotia forest is?
Mm,
Because like we're talking about Berwick, Nova Scotia here. There's no way that they couldn't cover, and they probably have numerous times, Like they would have found something.
Well, he was barefoot.
Oh yeah.
He all
Never
he
mind.
had on was his hospital gown. And again, the temperature's -3, -4-ish. It was just getting dark when when he jumped out and took off. My thing is, if they searched for him, the search area wouldn't have to be that big
No.
because you're not going to get too far. Even if you get in the woods and you're barefoot and let's say you've completely lost touch with reality, you're still going to have that adrenaline dump within half hour, an hour at most, and you're not
Yeah.
running full speed through the woods because you're struggling to move. You're probably injured and continuously getting injured as you're running through the woods. So I think it's really bizarre to me that they weren't able to find him. And if they didn't find him, that makes me think that maybe he wasn't in the woods within several kilometers of the hospital.
It's just not logical.
Hmm.
Because if he had been, if he didn't, get into some sort of transportation, vehicle, train, whatever, it's not possible for him not to be around.
Hmm. Well,
Like you can't teleport.
and that leads us to another theory that's one that's often discussed and that is weirder than anything else. I think that will come up in this story. I never thought of this, what I'm about to describe, as being a possibility, but just thinking of the private investigator saying this has a bizarre start, and I think it's going to have an even more bizarre end. That makes me think that maybe he's referring to one of the often discussed theories is that Lyndon joined and took off with a very secretive religious cult that was active in the area.
This is piquing my interest.
It would be just about an hour walk from the hospital Lyndon escaped from to a farm in rural Nova Scotia that was taken over and served as a sort of compound for this very secretive religious cult based in the United States. I'll tell you a bit about them. They're known as the 12 Tribes, is what people call them. They're based in Vermont. Their real name is the Northeast Kingdom Community Church. They're a fundamental Christian group, again, known most commonly, if you Google them, they're referred to as the 12 Tribes. But what they're most known for is being very secretive, having deeply fundamentalist beliefs, and being strictly distancing themselves from the outside world or non-believers. And at the time that Lyndon disappeared, I can't find anything to connect him with this group other than the fact that an hour walk away is this group, and the group was in the news at the time for not kidnapping people, but two members of the group, specifically the leader and another member, were in trouble with the law in child custody disputes, where they were kind of taking their kids away from the mom and embedding them into the church and kind of hiding them in the United States and all this sort of thing. So the leader of this commune, an hour away from his hospital, was charged and arrested several times related to, like, I don't know if the word would be kidnapping, but it's like breaching the conditions of a custody agreement. But people who join this group, the 12 Tribes, they all but disappear from society. They just leave.
They're checking off all the cult boxes.
You wouldn't know it from the outside, but members of a controversial religious organization run the businesses behind these yellow walls. When you walk in, there's dozens of free pamphlets inviting customers to learn more and join their organization.
People are very friendly, what we call love bombing, and wanting to get you involved with activities, asking you a lot of detailed personal information.
Members typically give up personal possessions and work for the tribe. These yellow delis exist all around the world.
They're basically working for nothing more than room and board. If they leave the group, they have nothing.
Rick Ross leads the Cult Education Institute. He's worked directly with former members of the 12 Tribe.
In my opinion, the 12 Tribes fits the basic core criteria of a destructive cult. And that is that there is a charismatic leader that has no meaningful accountability, becomes an object of worship, and is a virtual dictator over the people in the group. Second, that the group uses such things as social isolation and coercive persuasion to gain undue influence over people in the group. And then finally, that they use that influence to exploit and do harm to the people in the group. In my opinion, 12 Tribes fits all three of these core characteristics.
Yeah, you can find videos, you can read articles about them, find videos of them on YouTube where there's several interviews with the members during the period of time in the 80s where a lot of them were getting arrested for taking the kids away from the mothers. This was something that was happening. But
And were you aware of this group before, like
I
right now?
I only know of them in the context of Lyndon Fuller's case.
Okay.
I had read like a little bit about this case in the past, like several years back, and when I was researching it, people I were talking to were people I spoke to about it said like, "Oh, he's definitely got swept up in that cult and took off with them." But other than the fact that that cult was in the area and the cult was also in the news at the time, I can't find any link. I don't have anyone saying like, you know, through the 4-H group, he managed to, you know, connect with this cult and he, you know, had friends in it or something. If I found something like that, I would think it was a possibility, but I can't. The logical part of my brain says it's just people trying to understand what happened to Lyndon and there was something else strange in the news, so they linked it. Just like if, you know, if there was a UFO sighting in the news from a 2-hour drive away, people would be saying Lyndon was abducted by aliens.
Well, we'll get there. That's one of my theories. But
Okay.
this cult thing it's not too far off because like what if one of the members, I don't know if they drive, I don't really know anything about this 12 tribes, but like what if they just saw him like walking along the dirt road and offered him a ride and like salvation and to
We can
find
help you.
God
Like, yeah, like
will heal you.
society's not working for you. That
Yeah.
society, join ours.
Like what if
It's
he's
like,
still there?
it's a possibility. And this church, if you want to call it a church, a cult, a religious movement, they move around. They have kind of what they would do is they owned all these different properties that were kind of treated as communes. So they'd buy a farm in the middle of nowhere, and 30 of their members would go live on that farm. And that's kind of what they had going on not far from Berwick. But when the arrests were made for some of the members of the group for quote unquote kidnapping their kids in custody disputes, a lot of them fled that area and left Nova Scotia and went to Vermont where the main kind of base was. But it was, you know, they traveled around throughout the US and throughout Canada in these little
Interesting.
farms. So it is a possibility. And
Well,
I
and he
would,
was an adult too. So like they couldn't even if they, let's say they found him, they couldn't make him leave.
that's the thing, yeah. But when I think of this theory of him joining, somehow ending up with this cult, to me, that's one of the only ways that the private investigator makes sense. Because again, like everything I know about the case, it seems like what they need to hire, the family or people looking for Lyndon would need to hire someone to search the woods, cadaver dogs, you know, these sorts of things. Not a private investigator, where a private investigator is more like a detective that's, you know, interviewing people and
We need someone to infiltrate that cult.
mhm,
We need
that's
to send someone in. I'll
yeah,
go.
I think like one of the things that makes the cult seem most likely or seem most possible is the fact that they have a private investigator that made that
Right.
kind of dark statement about the bizarre ending.
See, I'm not stupid enough to join a cult, but I am nosy enough.
Mhm.
So yeah, I volunteer to like go undercover
This is
and
like
look for Lyndon.
this is a deeply fundamentalist cult. I don't think they would want anything to do with you. You would be sprayed with holy water and
I'd
cast out.
burst into flames upon entering the property.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Oh,
Mm-mm,
like,
I
no, we don't want you.
Yeah, no,
You're
thank
not
you.
you're not a good fit.
Again, we kind of went through the main theories, at least the ones that are most often publicly discussed. Something like self-harm or misadventure, exposure to the elements. Possibly he started a new life on his own accord somewhere, or he could have joined that secretive cult. He could have also been met with foul play. That's always a theory, and you know, hit by a vehicle or
What kind of wildlife is
you
out
know,
there? You guys have bears in Nova Scotia?
yeah, but I don't think it would be likely that it would be the kind of thing that Like it wouldn't be bears that would devour a human whole and not
Yeah.
leave evidence. Like if you're attacked by a bear here, it's you got in its way and it smacked you.
Well, and don't you guys only have
You know,
brown
that's sort of
bears?
thing.
They're like large squirrels. Like you have to worry about a grizzly,
Oh, come on.
not a
No,
black
no, no.
bear.
In Nova Scotia, it would be, it's not often that someone is killed by an animal, and certainly not often that they're like eaten whole. I don't know if that's ever happened here before. We don't have those kind of animals. That's why it's
Well,
so
and
great here.
especially to not leave any trace of anything. Like that's just very unlikely.
In an area that presumably people will be
Right.
looking. And again, no evidence, nothing found. There was, the most notable, I think, search in the many years since Lyndon's disappearance. There was a tip that a kid saw a footprint frozen in water somewhere near where he was last seen. And there was a large search in 2003 in that area, but nothing was found. But again, it's, someone remembers seeing a footprint 20 years
Yeah,
ago, 15
that's a
years
little
ago.
wild.
Lyndon's family released age-enhanced photos of him. They did that as well in 2003, and those are still floating around. If people Google Lyndon Fuller's name, they'll see a handful of photos of him in the time during his life prior to his disappearance. Then they'll find his age-enhanced photos showing what he would look like now as like a 50-ish year old man. But that's really it for the story. His parents, as far as I can tell, are still with us, both in their 80s, and both, I'm sure, haunted by the mystery of what happened to their son. And
I couldn't
what a
imagine.
way to see him go. Like the last moment is him jumping out of the third story of a hospital room and taking off and not being found. Could you imagine how that would
It's
haunt you?
just, it's so. I once watched a documentary, I think it was on Amazon Prime, and it was called Missing 411. And it covered, I think, 5 cases. And the first 4 were cases a lot like this, where people just seemingly vanished. Like I remember there, and
Yeah,
I think in like provincial parks or national parks.
missing 411 was like somebody like kind of compiled all the cases of people who went missing in national
Yes.
parks in the United
But like I
States.
remember one of the cases was, I think it was a man and his son, and they were camping or something, and his son just like ran just beyond a hill in front of him, and then by the time he got there he was gone, and like he was never found again. There was no trace, and it's just like so strange.
Yeah, where can people go? But if there's water, especially moving water, that's like always what I
Yeah.
think of. In this case, Lyndon was a far way from any major body of water, so that's unlikely, but
Now, how close to Shag Harbor is Berwick?
this is a long ways away from there. You wouldn't make that run. Do you think it was aliens?
I'm not going to rule anything out.
I'm going to lean maybe more towards cults.
Well, when you pointed out the private investigator, now I'm leaning more towards cult, and not that there's a Berwick triangle, much like
a cult or foul play. The private investigator, that part doesn't sit right with me. I don't see it as I'm searching the woods, the forest in this area. I'm going to hire a private investigator.
Yeah, and you're right.
A retired RCMP officer.
What he said about a bizarre beginning and a bizarre end, there might be something there.
Yeah, and again, we talking as the public, the only things we've went through for this discussion tonight is what's publicly available through articles or documents that were released publicly. I hope the private investigator and the family knows a hell of a lot more than we do about Lyndon's behavior leading up to his disappearance, and what maybe people close to him have said. So that statement from the private investigator is like our little window or glimpse into what they know, and it implies that this bizarre end that he's speculating he's going to find, and based on the whole analogy about the puzzle pieces, it seems like this bizarre end is kind of what he's close to finding. That bizarre end is not going to be, and we found him in the woods. He succumbed to the elements. Like that's not bizarre.
So do you think if he did run off and either join a cult, or he moved to Tahiti and started a new life, is he alive? Do you think he is alive if that happened?
My
No.
and this comes up with a lot of these cases as well. That was also when I did a lot of coverage about the disappearance of Emma Filipov, who also vanished out of thin air.
To
But
thin air.
that said, near a harbor, so it's a bit of a different situation. But in the dark. But the way I always answer that question is, if they're in Canada, they're going to show up somehow to somebody, and the whole
You'd
thing will be
think.
revealed. If you need medical treatment for something, you get a throat infection, you get strep throat. You got to go to, like, you need something. You're not just going to die of it on the street somewhere, right?
However, in the 80s, like 88 wasn't that long ago, but it was long enough ago that it was easier to like change your identity or like get into the States without a passport.
But this
There are
guy,
things like that.
this guy, Lyndon, seeming 22 years old, so he's a kid from a kind of farming community with a background in that. It's not like he's this technical spy kind of guy who seems to be in the middle of a mental health crisis. I just don't think he's equipped to, like, I'm going to run to Vancouver and I'm going to get a fake ID and start a new life. And
You never know. Yeah.
it just, I just don't see it. And I said the same thing. I say the same thing with a lot of missing persons cases, especially when it involves mental health. Like, if they are somewhere else, they're probably on a street corner somewhere, needing some help. But something would have happened over the last 30 years that would have resulted in him accessing healthcare in a way that would require them figuring out who he is.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. At this point with Lyndon Fuller, I think I don't see this as a case that's going to be solved. Do you think there's any chance that something will happen now, all this time later, that will break this case? Like, it's almost been 40 years.
Maybe I'm just what word am I looking for? That's not toxic positivity.
Something like faith and optimism mixed together, and a belief that the world's not as awful as it really is.
I often underestimate just how vast nature is and how unforgiving it is.
Well, we won't solve this one
Okay.
tonight, but this is our second in a row we didn't solve. Last week, we didn't solve the Dylan Koshman case. This week, we didn't solve this case. We'll try again in a week or two. But actually, you know what? I think we need a break. What do you say? Creeps next.
Oh, I'm down for that. But if anyone important to this case is listening, know that I volunteer as a tribute to infiltrate a cult. I'll go in.
Will you
if
wear
you
a
need
microphone
someone.
and so we can hear it too?
Yeah. I'll wire up and act my best. Be on my best behavior.
Even if you don't get results, it will be entertaining. So I will gladly support that.
We can make a documentary. Let's do it.
I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Nighttime. After listening, if you have a theory on what may have happened to Lyndon, or if you have any information on the case that we missed, we'd love to hear it. You can send us a voice message at nighttimepodcast.com/contact, and we'll do our best to include it in the next episode. Now, with all that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part here, let me end with some thanks. First, a big thanks to Madeleine for sharing another evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. A shout out to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this episode, and Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides our intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now, on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed, Jean, Ella, and Christina. We appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can do it in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money funds the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If you're interested, you can go premium at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why they should listen. Your support is very much appreciated. Now, until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.